Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Lodge podcast. I am your host, Scott Milley, and we are so excited to be back for episode 9, the start of a brand new season for the Lodge podcast, season 2. Joining me today is my uniquely talented guest, Renee Wong. Renee, how are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you?
Fantastic. Just excited to be back making content, to be honest. Renee is a communication specialist at Gameloft Toronto with a background in marketing, communications, branding, PR, and so much more. Today, we're going to be talking about her impressive career, mobile gaming, Gameloft Toronto's place in the industry, Pocket Gamer Connects Toronto, where a bunch of us got to go to recently, and so much more. So, without further ado, let's get into the conversation. So before we get too far into it, I want to make sure that I get to introduce our new producer for the show, Natalie Doherty. Natalie has been working with the Lodge and Interactive Ontario for almost 2 months now and has already made a huge impact on the brand and the team as a whole. She will be off mic for this particular episode, but look forward to Natalie contributing and being a big part of our future episodes down the road. So, Renee, let's kick it off, shall we? So the first thing I wanted to do, I always ask a guest a gaming related question. For season 1, we were asking about people's prime gaming conditions. Do you like playing in the morning? Do you like playing at night? Quiet with friends, things like that. For season 2, though, I wanted to kind of switch it up a bit. What served as the catalyst for your current career in the video game industry? Was it your first game experience, a conference, a brand? What was it that hooked you and said, I need to work in video games?
Oh gosh, I feel like I guess I've always had a long history with gaming. Starting from when I was really young, my dad was actually the one who got me my N64. That's the first system that I got, and even before then, I'd play on my cousin's Game Boy and things like that. So I was just always really into gaming, and then I think the first game that really hooked me on gaming and that made me continue gaming was Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. I think that's a pretty big game for a lot of people, especially.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so it continues to be my favorite game of all time just because it has such fond memories for me. But I guess since then I've just always wanted to be in gaming, and I went through I think a lot to kind of get where I am and to be like, okay, maybe communications is what I want to do. Because at first I was like, I went to an art high school, so I always wanted to be an artist, and then I was like, maybe I want to do programming instead. So I kind of switched back and forth a lot during my educational years, I guess. And then I finally was like, you know what, like maybe I want to be a bit more on the business side of things, more on the administrative side of things. I mean, you yourself, Scott, you're our communications lead as well at Interactive Ontario, and I find it's so neat to be able to like kind of get the messages that you need to across to people, but then also to work in an industry that is exciting for you and that you're really passionate about. So I was very fortunate to find the opportunity that I have right now at Gameloft Toronto.
That's one thing I definitely want to get into. We are going to get a little more into your career because you started as a brand ambassador was one of the first things you got to do. So I definitely
Yeah.
want to talk about that. But yeah, that's same kind of thing for me. Ocarina of Time was like monumental. But I think that's really interesting because most people that I talk to are either they got into programming and they stuck in programming, or they want to get communications, stuck in communications. I've kind of been the same way where it's like I want to get in the video game industry. Where do I fit? Where do my like talents and skills align with the industry? I just know where I want to be. And it seems like you
Mm-hmm.
kind of had a similar journey where it's do we start with art or do we start with programming, and communication just seems to be the perfect role for you.
Yeah, absolutely.
So one thing I did want to ask is we didn't get to see each other, which is very unfortunate, but I wanted to ask about Pocket Gamer Connects Toronto. So the Lodge actually has a partnership with Nordicity coming up starting next week called Nordicity Recaps, where we're going to be kind of hosting a live podcast and doing a short form video on the event itself. But I wanted to talk to you a little bit about Gameloft's experience because Gameloft was a sponsor, yes?
Yeah. We were one of the track sponsors. We were sponsoring the Art of Publishing for Pocket Gamers Connects, and for us, honestly, it was great. It was after such a long 2 years of having literally no events because of COVID-19 and everything, right? It was very exciting for the team to kind of get back together. We had a pretty good turnout. I would say about like 10 or so of Gameloft Toronto employees were there. And it was always kind of funny because the venue, if anyone else went, they would know it's not huge, but it's not small either. But, it's in a hotel, so there's like hallways and whatnot. And sometimes we would kind of gather in one place, and we were always welcome to chat. I got to meet so many great people, like a lot of new faces, a lot of old faces, and then so did my colleagues as well. Mostly because they were like, oh, it's like you're from Gameloft. I didn't know that you guys were in Toronto, so that was really great for us as an opportunity to put ourselves out there. And we did also have two talks or a panel and a talk. So we had our studio manager Mike do a talk about data and development, so how you can turn kind of the data that you get into sort of like a plan to move forward with a game that will be successful, especially in a saturated market such as mobile gaming, right? And then we also had our monetization and marketing director Flavio do a panel about essentially like ads in gaming, and then how you can make that seamless and essential for obviously making sure that your game is profitable moving forward.
That was a really interesting talk. That was one that I made sure to go to. Obviously, one, Gameloft. Two, because I found that conversation really interesting, because mobile gaming and that side of the industry, I'm pretty alien to. I do have the few mobile games that I get into, but being at IO and having, numerous high level companies that are mobile gaming centric. Like we had Big Blue Bubble on, a few episodes ago, and obviously with Gameloft coming on, it was something I'm trying to familiarize myself with a little bit more. And I thought like Flavio touched on like a lot of like really interesting points of that. Obviously with mobile being like monetization based, but it's doing it in an organic way and doing it in a not such an in your face type of way. Like there's an art to it, right? There's an art to the advertising side of things, and I thought like he really spoke well to that. So the game needs to be great. Like the quality needs to be there. Like that's first and foremost. If that's not there, nothing else works. So the first thing was working with the brand and really building that up and building out the mechanics, and then his team kind of coming in and like, how do we do this in an organic and fun way without, getting in the way of people's enjoyment of it.
Yeah, and I think that's something that people don't always think about. Like mobile gaming is so different from making like a console game or a PC game. Like there's a lot of things you have to think about. Like even just the model of the game, right? Like are you doing free to play? Are you doing like like PC and console games? Do you just pay one time and you get all these things? Are there DLCs? Like there's all these things that you need to consider. And then of course Gameloft being a mobile game, a majority company, right? A lot of our games are free to play, but then you have to think about, of course, on a business side of things, how do we kind of continue, right? How do we make money so that we can keep making great games and keep paying our employees fairly so that they can continue doing what they do and what they love?
I think it's such a tricky thing too in the gaming industry of all things, because like people look at games and look at like monetization. Like there's some people that are just like hard out on mobile because they aren't interested in that type of like revenue model. But like you have what, 2 billion people in the world that are mobile, like consider themselves mobile gamers. Like it's such a vast market, especially with all the IPs that Gameloft has, that I think you can like, there's so many different sectors and so many different like groups of people that you can connect with. Which I definitely want to get into in a little bit more in a bit, where we start talking a little bit more of the mobile industry and some of the wonderful IPs that Gameloft Toronto are currently working on. But the first thing I wanted to get into is your career. So, like I teased before, there was a time where you were a brand ambassador for Sony, which I thought very interesting. Can you tell me a little bit about that experience, about working with Sony in that type of capacity?
Yeah, so I want to first say that it sounds more impressive than it is, but I was a brand ambassador for both Sony as well as Nintendo for a period of time. And that mostly was, I would say, it entailed kind of being the public face for those companies. Obviously, it was a lot more of a sales sort of role where I got out to mostly to public places, so like malls. I was at the airport at one point, and then I would either show people or like educate them about the games that were being released at the time or whatever newest, let's say, hardware that they had. So like for Sony, most of my time was trying to advertise the PSVR, right? And then showing people how it works, showing the capabilities of it. And it's still something that I actually ended up getting one myself after that. So I think it
Nice.
clearly worked on me, right? It was a role that I really appreciated in terms of working with people who don't necessarily play games or consider themselves hardcore gamers, right? So it's another way of kind of building my skill, I feel, at the end and getting me where I was, because it was like, how do I work with people who game, but how do I work with people who also don't game, but who want to start, right? So that was really cool.
And that kind of almost like a trial by fire, right? You're having to do that in person, face to face. But
Yeah.
like a lot of communications can be behind a screen where you can take some time to write up a press release. But
Hmm.
then when you're doing the actual like customer facing, like like I feel like you like kind of like sharpening a blade with a whetstone, right? Like you're being put in that situation. So now when you're in like talks and stuff like that, you're like prepared for all kinds of questions.
Hmm.
And I feel like if they have VR would be the most important thing to be showing people, right? Because that's like
Yeah.
something that most people have no idea, or like you really truly need to experience it to understand it. You can't really show it through a commercial. It's like, no, you need to put the headset on. So was that something that you found interesting? Was actually having to like set people up with VR for the first time and be like kind of coach them through it? Because I feel like that would be really off-putting for people the first time they do it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Even when I tried it myself, right? Like I feel like you don't really know what you expect until you actually use the system. So like, you're kind of like, oh, I put something on and I'm supposed to be in this virtual world or something like that, right? But then it's like, what is that virtual world capable of? And like, that's a conversation that the gaming industry has currently with a bunch of different things, right? Like, um, just what exactly are we capable of producing in the future. So for me it was definitely interesting, especially because at the time, like, the PlayStation VR system was one of the few, I guess, like, commercial, besides like the Oculus and things, right? That was the
Yeah.
one that was produced by the big three, you know what I mean, like Nintendo, Sony, PlayStation, or sorry, PlayStation, and Xbox. So having people kind of recognize the brand and being like, oh, Sony does that, or like, what is Sony doing with that specific tech? That was pretty interesting. And then, yeah, getting people's reactions, especially when it was their first time. We had like kind of simulations where you go into the sea. We had, obviously some like flying games and stuff too. And based on what people wanted to play, I would kind of run that game for them. And then some people just got so into it, like in the kind of ocean simulation, there's fish and stuff. Of course we had to put in a shark, so some people, they really jumped from their seats when they saw that. So yeah, that was really fun.
What a cool experience though. And look, I mean, the team at the lodge, we went to VRTO recently a couple weeks ago, and that was a whole different type of experience, right? Like, done VR before in the past, but like where this medium is going and where the future in it is going, and with companies like Secret Location in Ontario that are doing, and like
Mm-hmm.
Dark Slope, right, with their hyper reality TV coming up, like the stuff that they're working on is just so it's such a cliche term, but like next level, right? Like it's such an interesting side of the industry that some people will never even look at,
Mm-hmm.
right? So like some people are so console focused, so PC focused, mobile focused, but like if you look at all the different sections throughout gaming, it truly does like cover billions and billions of people, which is why I love the industry so much, because it's the things you can be in the industry your whole life just like me, and then still have an entire section of the industry that you have no exposure to, and that there's always so much to learn, and everything's changing so rapidly.
But yeah, like you were saying, I think it's great, especially for Ontario. And I'm mentioning, of course, because we are Interactive Ontario and we're on the podcast. But there's just so many great game companies here that deal in so many specific like fields, right? Like you have people who are focused more on mobile, like Gameloft, and you have people who, they strictly make, let's say, PC or console game. And then, like you were saying, there are some studios as well that are focused on, like, VR, or kind of like, I guess, next gen sort of entertainment, and that's always really cool to see. And it's really cool to be able to gather in places, like a common place, to be able to be like, hey, what are you guys working on? And like, oh, that's really cool. And then as opposed to, I feel, some places may be a bit more competitive. In Toronto, I feel, or in Ontario, more generally, it's more of a, we're just looking out and seeing what other people are doing, and we're just kind of supporting each other and saying like, yeah, that's neat, and like I look forward to seeing what you guys come up with.
That's something I brag about constantly. And it's like always like talking to like the team like out of St. Catharines. Like there's a bunch of wonderful studios there and a bunch of great ones in Toronto, that there doesn't seem to be that head to head, like, oh, we don't want you to see what we're
Mm-hmm.
doing. It's like, hey, this is what we're doing, this is what you're doing. Let's talk about it. Let's like share war stories. and like kind of collaborate, right? And like we can talk about ideas and talk about how you got through certain situations. So I love going to talks. That's why I thought Pocket Gamer was fantastic. I'm really glad that they're coming back because I think that's something that Ontario needs, and especially now post COVID, we're starting to see those type of events coming back in those talks,
Yes.
and really see the talent be able to speak. So it was great to see Flavio at Pocket Gamer get to talk about that stuff. One thing I did also want to talk about, because it's close to my heart, is you went and got yourself a degree in PR.
I did, yes.
After all of that prior experience, what was it that wanted you, like, that made you want to go and do public relations at Seneca?
Honestly, I guess it kind of goes back to what I was talking about before, where I did kind of find a passion after sort of numerous career changes and numerous like testing out like what fields I wanted to do and stuff. Like I said before, I went to a high school for where I majored in visual arts, and I was really set on. I think it's like the obvious choices, right? Like, how do I get into the game industry? It's you work on making the game. So that's, artist, which I ended up just thinking art I felt was a bit more of a hobby for me. And then I went to the programming, figure out it was too mathy for me. I don't think I could have done it long term at all, even though I did try and it was great. And kudos, obviously to all the artists and programmers and everyone who ends up making the games. That kind of give, yeah, that we all kind of get together for those, right, for the games and whatnot. Yeah, and then I ended up in a variety of places. While I was doing the brand ambassador thing, was usually sort of a side thing for me, no matter what I was doing. But then I went into banking, I went into engineering, I went into, like you said, like public relations and investor relations. And it all kind of boiled down to, at the end of the day, I ended up doing my job. It wasn't as passionate for me as I wanted to be. I feel like I never could let go of the idea of, man, it would be really cool working in gaming kind of thing. And then every sort of part of my job, I always found that I ended up being some sort of communicator, being someone who was facilitating like some sort of relationship between departments or even like my team members or things like that. So it almost felt like natural for me to think like, okay, I think my skills right now are too varied, and I wanted to get a certificate to kind of cement like communications and public relations is something that I actually know, something that I'm an expert at. Obviously a certificate to show that I went to school for it, right, to kind of help me kind of build my career. And then it just so happened after that, I worked at an investor relations company, and then Gameloft Toronto posted their position for a communication specialist. So I was like, well, I got to at least try, right? So luckily I did, because now I'm here.
That actually leads in perfectly to the next question. Also, my love for PR is because that's also my background. So that's what got me into the gaming industry as well. So I saw that and I was like, I have to bring that up because that's super. Because most communications people I talk to don't really have that PR background. So I really love being able to talk to you about that. Now that you're at Gameloft Toronto, as you said, as a communication specialist, what attracted you there in the first place, and what makes it the right fit for you and where you are in your current career trajectory?
Oh, so that's actually a funny story. I have to start a little bit even further in the beginning than I think I already had. But when I graduated, when I graduated university the first time, this was back, so I'm aging myself a little bit, but this was back when people were handing out resumes door to door, and you would meet people face to face, right? So I was doing that, and then of course I was still kind of like, I want to work for gaming and things. So I looked at every single gaming studio at the time, and there wasn't as many as there is now, right? So the industry's definitely grown. But I kind of wrote down every single address, and I spent just like a whole day going to each one, handing out my resume, saying like, oh, I can basically do anything, like anything you want me to try and do. I just started. I don't really have like expert skills, but like I'm willing to, be an admin assistant, I was, be like someone who gets you coffee every day kind of thing. So that's kind of what I was doing. And then I went to Gameloft, and then I handed in my resume. Didn't expect and I hadn't gotten like an interview straight up since like that whole day of me doing like resume handing outs and things. So I handed on my resume and I was like, hey, I was just hoping perhaps like you could consider me for something. Kind of got ready to be like, okay, I'm gonna head out the door. But then the person who was there at the time, they're like, wait, actually, let me get my HR manager. And I was like, oh shoot, is it gonna happen now?
Ooh.
Like, am I getting an interview now? His name, and he's still here, but his name is Chris, our HR manager. He is now my manager. But he gave me an interview on the spot. Unfortunately, at
Wow.
the time, I didn't get the position because I was new, right, and I didn't really I know, or at least I feel like maybe at the time I didn't have much to offer because I was like literally newly graduated from university, didn't know like my skills at all at the time. Um,
That's also
but
a
yeah, so
terrifying
that's
situation to be in. No one
it was
expects to interview like on the
terrifying.
spot. You expect to go in,
Yeah.
drop it, and leave. Wow.
hmm Yeah, and then I was in my like blazer. I looked very like kind of professional. I was like, oh geez, I don't know what I'm doing. But he ended up connecting with me on LinkedIn, and then it's one of those things where you kind of connect with someone, you may or may not talk again in the future. But last year when they had the communications roll up, and I was like, okay, I need to try. And then I saw Chris was still at the studio, so I reached out to him and I was like, hey, I don't know if you remember me, but I applied ages ago. Like at this point, I guess it was like 7 years ago or something. Um, would you like to give me another interview now that I have skills to kind of offer you? And then he actually said that he did remember me. He was kind of like, oh yeah, I
Whoa.
vaguely remember. I think it was because it was such a specific circumstance. And he was like, I don't normally do interviews on the spot, but I do remember something like that. So like perhaps that was you, perhaps it wasn't, but I do think I kind of remember it. So then that was kind of our starting point to like, okay, yeah, let's go and do an interview. Let's see like, what's happened since then. And then I guess that's pretty much what ended up landing me here is that initial conversation that kind of attracted me to Gameloft. And since then, like since I've kind of gone into the studio and everything, like everyone's here has been great, super friendly. As you can see, like some people have stayed here for years and years, right?
Yeah.
Because they love the culture here, and I can see why. And especially when someone like remembers such a small incident, like that small meeting like that, like it makes me feel really cared for.
That means so much to people, right? When you can
hmm
remember stuff like that. And that also speaks a lot to the importance of networking, which
hmm
is exhausting and stressful for a lot of people, but you can see the benefits of it. That's why like we're
Yes.
trying to make more of a point of being at a lot of these events. And like I'm trying to talk to everyone that I possibly can. It's like I've said this before on the podcast, like I'm a pretty introverted person for the most part, but I love the gaming industry. And I love the people that make these games. It's wizardry to me, right? That's why I went to the communication side because programming and art wasn't for me. But it's
hmm
that networking side of things that's so important. And just like you said, like that's how you one of the reasons why you landed that role. So it's fantastic that you're able to do that. What was one challenge that you weren't prepared for when you went into the role or you weren't expecting?
Uh, let me see. I actually am not sure. I think perhaps the one thing um, that I wasn't expecting, and prior to of course, getting into Gameloft, like you said, I did have gaming experience, even though it wasn't full time. But I did also do a little bit, like once I got my certificate in PR and communications, I did a little bit of, I guess, like consulting work. So like things like social media strategies and whatnot for indie studios around the city. So I was kind of a bit more familiar with that kind of thing, like how to work quickly for indies and like kind of how to attract attention and stuff, especially when the games that they make are typically for themselves. Like it's typically their own IP or their own like original creation.
Yeah.
When I went into Gameloft, obviously we do a lot of games that are IPs, right? One of the games that we deal with is Disney Magic Kingdoms, and I would say it was just quite a different experience to be working with a partner like and being able to collaborate and have a relationship with a big brand. So that was something that I was like, oh, that's like I didn't know what I expected, but I definitely like it's been a ride since then, but it's been good. I've learned so much, and it's just kind of like um, there are different things that you have to consider, right? Compared to an indie game, where there's a lot of um, I guess like liberties in terms of like things that you can um, showcase or like um, just like, even like the works in progress and things like that, right? Like that's always interesting to see. And then with like IPs, things have to be a bit more planned out and a bit more thought through before, it kind of goes anywhere. So that was something that, especially in communications, right? When you want to like talk about things and stuff. So having messages that are more thoroughly, I guess, thought out before they're sent out and things like that.
That PR experience I feel has come in
Oh yeah.
handy when it comes to working with
Absolutely.
IPs of like this magnitude.
Hmm.
So the last thing I did want to ask about on the career side is obviously one of the reasons why we do this podcast in the first place. For me personally, I want students to be able to point, or even high school to be able to point to talent in the province, right? And say, hey, some parents still don't think that video games is a viable career path, right? Even though it's the most profitable entertainment industry in the world.
Hmm.
But I want people to be able to point to them. So what's one piece of advice you would give someone at that stage that is looking to get into communications and kind of use those skills that they've already kind of naturally developed on their own, um, that you weren't prepared for, or that you wish you had done maybe a little bit differently during that time of your life?
So in terms of, I guess, like communications and gaming is what you're asking
Yeah.
specifically?
People are looking to get into the gaming industry. What's something that you would say like this might not be something you're going to have at your first job, or this is something you should sharpen up on, or this is something you should be paying attention to, or a skill
Right.
you should learn that that will benefit you in the future?
I guess skill that I always tell people to kind of keep with them is being flexible, right? Being able to kind of work on the spot, especially because things are changing all the time. Like, there'll be one day where I'm kind of doing my own thing. I have my whole day planned out, and then someone will come to me and say like, "Hey, actually, like, this has happened," or like we got a notification about like something that's happening somewhere else, and like, now you kind of have to fit that in, or like. A big thing about PR is sometimes crisis management, and as much as we want things to always be working well and like going smoothly, there are things that happen where you gotta have to you kind of have to drop everything and be like, okay, this has to be addressed, right? At the same time, there's always like so many fun things to work on. Like my role is kind of new to Gameloft, especially Gameloft Toronto. So I am the only communications person here at the moment. So it involves a lot of
Wow,
things.
really?
Yeah, it's just me right now. So that's why sometimes you don't always
Wow.
get me on Discord because I'm a little bit busy doing other
Which
things.
is totally understandable. I had no idea. That's
Yeah.
impressive.
Yeah, but I
Wow.
mean, we're still growing, and that's the thing, right? Is we're working on new projects at Gameloft Toronto. We're growing our team. We're hoping to grow by the end of this year to 180 people, I think, and we just broke 100. So it's a pretty big milestone for us. And then obviously, every single role I think in the company will grow with it as well. So the communications team may grow, HR may grow, artists and tech, like they're always going to be growing, especially to kind of handle all of those new projects coming in. But yeah, like being flexible, being able to have a bunch of skills. That's kind of like, I don't want to be like one of those like people are gonna like you have to wear many hats and things like that.
No.
That's not necessarily true, but you have to be able to be flexible, be able to learn on the fly, and do things that are unexpected sometimes, so that we can assess like, oh, this is something that we can get more people for. This is something that we can grow a bit more, and then have more help for, have more support for. Like, what do you need, right? And then at this kind of time in our growing stage, this we can handle this for now until it gets to that point, kind of thing. Hopefully that
Well
makes
said. Well
sense.
said. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, absolutely. It's not as structured as some of
Yeah.
our like part of our brains would like it to be, right? Like,
Yeah, you wish like, everyone kind of had their thing and every day was 100% good, but like it's not always like that. And I think especially in the PR world, people know that like there's always something happening that you need to be prepared for, and I guess like being flexible and being prepared, right, to be able to do what needs to be done at the time is a very important skill, I feel.
never boring.
Yeah, definitely never boring, especially when you're doing mobile, because I do think that it is, in a way, kind of more quick than like console or PC, because those have there's years of planning involved. But a mobile game, the turnaround for that could be like, like maybe a year, maybe even less sometimes, depending on the game's scope, right? So you always have to be like, okay, like we're coming up really quickly. It's like, oh gosh, the year's already gone by, and you have to keep planning things and whatnot.
Wow, I didn't really think about that because yeah, you have like the dev cycle for like a normal console game is, you know, a couple years, maybe 3, you know, big triple A's, 4, 5, 6. But like, yeah, mobile, it gets that turnaround that you're getting all that information and having to plan out a whole strategy and having to get those things rolled out in such a short amount of time and get like part of the mind share of the industry like in that like such a short amount of time. So that's really interesting to me. I never really thought about that.
Yeah, and it goes back to what I was saying before, right? Mobile gaming is such, even though it's still gaming, it's such a different beast when it comes to planning and strategy than like other gaming. And I'm sure it would be the same as well, or you know, VR or something, right? Like the what you think is the traditional way of kind of maybe promoting a game or announcing a game and strategizing how you're gonna, you know, kind of market it or like just like the production timeline. It's so different because of just the different way it's being made or being like played with, right? Like more hyper casual people as opposed to like perhaps hardcore gamers or people who are like, you know, who have less accessibility to consoles and more accessibility to mobiles. And those are such a different audience sometimes.
Right. It's just like different, like even like sections of the world, right? Like there are so like
Mm-hmm.
a variety of demographics. So that was actually one thing that I did want to mention. We've already started talking about a little bit about Gameloft Toronto. But I also wanted to say that the lodge is run by the team at Interactive Ontario. It's a not-for-profit trade association based out of Ontario, Canada. We're a membership-based organization with one of our prominent members being Gameloft Toronto. So one of the things I wanted to get into was obviously some of the projects. So Gameloft Toronto as a whole, or sorry, Gameloft as a whole is a fairly large company with its what about 18 studios around the world now?
Gosh, I don't even, to be honest, if you ask me, which you are, I guess, but I don't even know the number, but we definitely have studios across the world. And in Europe, I think would have host most of our studios, but even in Canada alone, we have Gameloft Toronto and Gameloft Montreal, so that's two right there, right, compared to the rest of them.
Yeah, which is crazy to me. But that's one thing that like obviously like since you and me have really started talking is that Gameloft Toronto is looking to kind of cement its reputation, right? Like it's looking to
Hmm.
grow and to reach out to more and more people. With all of the incredible IP that Gameloft gets to work with, like has licensing deals with, like Disney, Minions, My Little Pony, all kinds of things. What IP does Gameloft Toronto work on prominently? I know obviously Disney Magic Kingdom, which we're going to get into in a moment, but is there anything else or any other IP that or Gameloft Toronto is also working with?
So right now, our current project and our active project is Disney's Magic Kingdoms. I can talk to a few of our previous games, which was we had CSI Slots, we had Blacklist, we had Lego Legacy Heroes Unbossed. Though that game, I think you can actually still download on Apple Arcade if people want to. Then we also had like Uno, so we've worked with Mattel, Hasbro, a bunch of other IPs as well. But yeah, currently it's just Disney Magic Kingdoms for us.
So, one question I definitely want to ask before we actually get into Disney Magic Kingdoms, of all of the IP that Gameloft works with, which one do you yourself want to work on the most, personally?
Ooh. Like that we currently have or that we could have in the future?
Both. I'm gonna go with
Both.
both. Yeah.
Well, I gotta say Disney because I think it's always fun to work, you know, to work on a Disney game and to work with IPs that you're familiar with, right, and that you've kind of grown up with and love. So you know, anytime I see the team giving like a new update, I think I guess like maybe a little bit biased, but like my favorite character personally is Mulan, right, from Disney, one of my favorite characters, and you know, when they had like kind of the Lunar New Year festival, and that was obviously a character that they released for it. That was really exciting for me. So yeah, like just seeing those IPs that you know and love kind of grow up with you, and now like still be in your life in a small sort of way. That's really cool. And I guess like an IP that I would love to work for. And I don't, you know, this is sort of more of a dream. This is very like my own personal opinion
Oh,
because I
100%.
I have no idea how it would work on like kind of the game production side of things. But I guess like I would love if Gameloft could maybe do a partnership with Nintendo. If we could do like, you know, Nintendo does have a few mobile games, but maybe if they've ever wanted to outsource to someone like Gameloft, 100% would be down for that.
That's a good answer, and I think a very fair answer. I would Nintendo, if you're listening, you know where to go.
Yeah.
Also, yeah, Mulan, you just like spoke to my heart. Like I listen to that soundtrack like probably once a week still.
It's a
Like it's
good
like,
soundtrack, so
oh, Yeah, run on a regular basis. So Disney Magic Kingdom has been around for about 6 years now,
Hmm.
and it still continues to see like such a great success in the mobile space. What do you think is one of the secrets to its longevity? That's
Um,
not a short
hmm,
amount of time for a mobile game to be around and to
for
be
sure, yeah.
continually growing and being added to. Like,
I think a lot of it is the dedication that our team has to the game and trying to bring the Disney characters that you know and love to life in the way that they remember them, right? So one of the things that you know, like the art style of Disney Magic Kingdoms is we bring all of the 2D into sort of like a 3D format. But then you still want to keep the way that it looks, right? The way that people remember it. You don't want to alter it in any way that looks unfamiliar, right? So I think a lot of it is that. A lot of it is just the fans themselves are so enthusiastic about it, and there's just like a certain like, you know, you don't want to let them down, so you always want to keep making like new content and like just new ways for them to enjoy the game. Recently, actually, we launched our latest update. Was kind of like, I'd say they like a reorganization almost of how you can play the game in a way that is actually fun for both new and old players. Because you know, sometimes you get into a mobile game, and I feel like this is something that any long-lasting game deals with. And there's so much content from years and years ago, you don't even know where to start, right? And then for obviously older players, like, you know, they always want something new, right? They want something to kind of keep themselves entertained. So like the fact that we're always thinking about like how do we make it so that we're still attracting new people, but we're still making sure that all of our older players and our loyal players, right, are having or like they're getting something out of the game while they're still playing, because at the end of the game you want to enjoy it, right? You don't want it to be kind of a chore, like you don't want to log in for your dailies all the time and things like that, and that's kind of it. That's, you just feel like you have an obligation to it. um, so yeah, I think that's probably what I think makes this game such a successful game for us, and it is, you know, one of our top games at Gameloft, next to Asphalt actually, which is a game that Gameloft Barcelona produces. So yeah, like just being able to listen to our players and like giving them an experience that they want.
it's like ultimate live ops, right? Like you're actually able to like kind of like reinvent yourselves in a way, but still keep the like core of the game there and trying to. It's such a tricky balance, right? Of like keeping your current players happy, but also being welcoming to new players. But yeah, like obviously I put a little bit of time into it in like preparation for the show, and I just went through. I spent like 5 minutes going through all of the characters. You know,
There's a
I
lot.
kept like everyone knows how big Disney is, but like it's still easy to forget like how many actual like beloved, like not even just side characters you forget about, like people's favorites all the way through. And I was like, Star Wars, and I see like Lilo and Stitch, like my favorite, and like just kind of going through all of those. I'm like, I can't believe how much you can actually put into a game like that, and like
Hmm.
that you can speak to so many different people that are like, oh, I'm gonna play because I want to get this person. Oh, I'm gonna play until I can finally get this person, and then
Hmm.
keeping them like entertained to like get more and more and more. That was really interesting being able to jump in. So again, like I'm not a big mobile person, and it was like very friendly, right? It was very like a tutorial that holds your hand but doesn't force you, right? And it's very like welcoming and like a little bit of narrative, which I always appreciate, which is why I kind of fall off most mobile games, because the narrative is just like it's very very text based. There's nothing really like
Hmm.
grabs your attention. So that was something that has kept me playing, and I will continue to play.
Hey,
Um,
well, I'm glad we got a new fan.
yeah, like honestly, like I'm not a mobile person in any way, shape, or form. There's like maybe 2 or 3 games I've played for a long time. Like Fire Emblem Heroes is one of them, just because Fire Emblem
Hmm.
is one of the greats. But yeah, no, you've succeeded. I'm not just saying that because you're here.
Awesome.
I feel like Gameloft is so well known in the mobile space, but not as well known, of course, in console and PC, like we've discussed. Is this something that you think is like the company might view as an issue or something that they're trying to work on, or do you think sticking with over 2 billion people of a player base is enough for them?
Yeah, well, this is definitely something that Gameloft is working on. So even for Disney Magic Kingdoms, that's a game that is primarily mobile, and of course it started as mobile, but you can also play it now on your PC if you want, on the Windows app, on Facebook as well. Um, So it
I
is
see
like
that. I saw Facebook.
yeah, in a sense, it's we're trying to make it a bit more cross-platform and a bit more accessible for people. But a lot of the new games that we're coming out with, so if I can plug Gameloft Montreal's
Please, yeah.
Dreamlight Valley, Disney Dreamlight Valley, that one is for console and PC. Even like want to say like I think some versions of Asphalt, you see them on the Switch now as well, so you can play that. Disney Speedstorm, another Disney game that we're working on, that is also going to be on the Switch, on Steam. There's early access for those as well. The beta I think is still ongoing at this time. I could be wrong, but yeah, like those are all games that we are trying to make cross-platform in as many ways as we can. So I think it's not so much of an issue with for us. It's where the game works the best, and then that's
Which
where we want to be.
Switch just feels like the natural successor,
It
right? Or like
does, yeah,
the
yeah.
natural place. Like it seems to be the easiest, or maybe
Mm-hmm.
not the easiest, like technical wise, but like it seems to be the place that like most mobile games are able to kind of find a second home. Because like PC, right? Like they seems to push away most mobile titles. And then yeah, consoles is obviously a little bit different. Switch, I just feel it has that Switch effect, right? Where it's like things
Yeah,
just succeed, things just sell, and people are able to have those maybe more little casual experiences are kind of to be expected as well on the Switch, as well as their giant JRPGs and Zeldas and Mario's things like that.
exactly. Yeah.
One thing I did want to talk about, since Gameloft Toronto is trying to make like such more of a bigger presence in Ontario, is Ontario itself. So you've worked in Ontario for quite a while now.
Mm-hmm.
So like
Born and
right now we have
raised.
like a big Steam sale coming up in September 7th to the 14th. I want to plug that now. We also we just talked about Pocket Gamer. We had XP, Canadian Game Awards, Game Slice coming up, plus a couple of to be announced events coming up this fall. And I'm not just saying that I like this because I'm part of an Ontario-based podcast. But there is a lot of really exciting things happening in the industry in the province. As someone who's been working in it for such a long period of time, do you feel like it's growing? Do you feel like it's the same, or what's something that you've really noticed that you enjoy of where the industry has gone over your tenure here?
I would say it's definitely growing. Like I said, like I started applying real early for any kind of like game position in Toronto specifically because that's where I live. But yeah, even like you said, there's a lot of studios popping up in Ontario in general, right? Like we have, London, Ontario with Warframe. Um,
Yeah.
and then, like we've gotten a bunch of bigger names too throughout the years, like Certain Affinity. I think there's like a few. It's escaping my mind right now, but I think like Snowden Studio and Ottawa, and there's
Yep.
just all these studios that I've been passing by and like seeing them grow and stuff like that. And even like I think with the pandemic, right? In a sense, we've kind of grown because of that as well. I know a lot of people are saying, there's so many things shifting in terms of like jobs, right? Gaming or otherwise because of the pandemic, because like people are offering remote and some people are not, and some people are like, return to work, hybrid. Like there's so many options now. So, I think the gaming industry as a whole is growing because of that, because we are now able to find talent um, within our city, but also outside of it. So even in Gameloft Toronto, we do hire remotely. So we do have a lot of hiring positions if people want to check those out later on. But yeah, like we have people from all over the world working for us. And that's just helping us grow, right? And that in a sense is helping Ontario itself grow. And of course, like I was saying, like even Gameloft Toronto itself, we're trying to grow to be a much bigger studio with a lot more projects that we can work on as opposed to our one active one Disney Magic Kingdom. So I think it can only get better from here and like grow more exponentially and like we'll attract more bigger name studios as well as like bigger talent that'll come here.
I think you're absolutely right when it comes to like people maybe getting priced out of Toronto, right? I think it's always been like a major concern of like we do have so many prevalent and great studios in the Toronto core, but especially people trying to get into the industry or maybe people at like a mid level, I feel like they can get priced out of some of the areas. But now with everything kind of being moved to hybrid, is just I think it's just helping a lot of the studios now because a lot of times for tax reasons people have to be in Ontario, which is of
Mm-hmm.
course what we want. We want people to be hiring local. But I think, yeah, it really benefits the studios like Gameloft Toronto, where if you have someone even in the GTA area or people out of Ottawa or London or St. Catharines or wherever, like they are able to join some of these other studios without having to, maybe pick up their life and move until they get to a certain point in their career. Because it can be scary for a lot of people. If you're in
Yeah,
Ottawa
for
and you want
sure.
to move and work for a studio in Toronto, starting remote, making sure that that connection works, and then moving, right? Instead of that leap of faith, I feel can be very like anxiety inducing for a lot of people.
Yeah, and yeah, we certainly have people who are in Ottawa. Fort Erie, I think, is one of our further ones as well. Kingston, or I think close to Kingston. So yeah, there's definitely a bunch of people. And I think one of the things that is both a challenge as well as kind of like an experience that I greatly enjoy kind of working on is as a communications person is just making sure that everyone is included, right, and making sure that the culture remains the same, whether or not it's online or in person. But for example, our studio, though, we welcome people to still come in. We are like voluntary return to work. So if people want to come in sometimes and work, and sometimes it makes more sense for them to stay home, then by all means, right? And I think that is sort of the model that you will start seeing in a lot of different places. Um, and that's like we were saying, that's kind of helping Ontario grow, is giving people the options to do things like that.
100%. That's definitely one of like the silver linings of all of this, right? Like obviously you and me have both talked about it on like plenty of other shows and like other conversations with people, but like it's starting to become a cliche, but it is something that's like a huge benefit. Is I would love to be able to do both, right? Like for
Mm-hmm.
me, like Interactive Ontario was fully remote even before the pandemic, so something that we
Right.
continue to do in the future. But I love to see that in studios where there are certain specific days that people will come in. That's when you have your all hands on meeting. That's when you have your community things that need to be dealt with and like can help people work on certain group projects together. But then you have those Mondays and Fridays and whatever other days where it's like it just makes sense for people to be able to kind of heads down, do their work, and live their life. Something that we're focusing more on
Mm-hmm.
now is quality of life, which is fantastic to see, and work life balance, which I think has really come to the forefront after these last couple of years. Is it's not the easiest thing in the world to juggle, and especially for like communications and a studio like that, making sure that everybody's good, emails aren't getting sent out at 10 o'clock at night,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
right? And like that's also another issue that I keep hearing from studios is that it's not, so many people would think that working remotely, people aren't working. The problem is people are working too much, or people are,
Right.
well, you're seeing people doing things at 6, 7, 8 o'clock at night. And it's like, you need to, as a manager,
Yeah,
right, you
you need
need
to
to like ring that in and be
disconnect.
like, no, because that becomes a problem. We don't want people to get burnt out. We want people to
Mm-hmm.
enjoy themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So
I've
yeah,
definitely
that's,
been guilty of that as well.
yeah, do as I say, not as I do kind of feeling.
Yeah, for sure. But sometimes, you're like, oh, just like this one more thing, I'll have less to do tomorrow. And then, it's 10 p.m. or something. And it's like, what are you doing? Like, which I think also shows like the passion that people have for the game industry, right? It's always really cool to see, but it's definitely important as well to kind of disconnect and just, take time for yourself. Just, kind of get your energy back so that you can keep working and keep being passionate without being burnt out at whatever it is that you're doing.
I agree. I absolutely agree. This is a conversation. We could talk about this for an hour.
I know this
Um,
is another topic altogether.
one of the last things I did want to ask you about, I wanted to ask, what is your favorite part about working in the province? So, like, you've worked in Ontario
Hmm.
the whole time you've been in your video game career. What has made you not want to go somewhere else? Is it family? Is it something that you're just comfortable with, or what about Ontario still speaks to you to this day that makes you want to be more and more a part of the industry?
Right. I guess like you kind of hit most of the points. I would say. I was born and raised in Toronto, Ontario. But Toronto and Ontario in general, like all the gaming events are here, right? It's kind of like all the things that are kind of like obviously there's exciting things everywhere, but I think like all the big events, right, and all those like huge exciting like fan expos and like EGLX, XP, like Pocket Gamer, they all come to Toronto. So even if I was still in at least the province of Ontario, it's a lot easier for me to go over there and work, right? Or like kind of do the partnerships, do the events and whatnot. And even just for myself, right, as someone personally who wants to visit all of those things. Um, that's kind of, I think, one of the biggest thing that makes me stay, is besides the fact that, yes, because I am, born and raised here, that does mean that a lot of my friends and families are here. So I do want to stay close to them as well.
That's that's a good answer. That's totally fair. It's like it's something that you're comfortable with, but it's
Yeah.
exciting to see that it's growing, right? Because there are
For
some
sure.
places, maybe not in the video game industry, but like some industries that where you're born and raised may not be the hotspot for it, or may not be a viable place where you have to travel to go to a place like that. But I think we're pretty lucky that it's like, no, Ontario's just growing and growing and growing. So it's actually like kind of going with your career trajectory, right? So
Exactly. Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
nice.
Yeah, and I mean, like, there are there's obviously other video game hubs in Canada as well, right? Like, of course,
Oh yeah.
Montreal, British Columbia, and Vancouver and whatnot. But like you're saying, I do see like Toronto is kind of always been a hotspot for events in general, of course. But we are growing, and I do see more gaming events happening, and it's exciting. I think is the gist of it, to be part of that growth as well.
The last thing I want to ask you today, what are you playing right now? Doesn't have to be Ontario. Doesn't have to be anything to do with the podcast or anything to do with Gameloft. I just want to ask, what are you currently working or playing on right now?
What am I playing right now? So I have been playing. I started this during the pandemic with my partner, but we've been playing a lot of Final Fantasy 14. I know a lot of people have started that during the pandemic as well.
Yes, me too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So we're currently right now we're actually on a break. We're unsubscribed from it, but like I always go back to it, and I have a bunch of friends. We basically have a community, right? And that was kind of the way that me and my friends that I could see in person, like that's how we would connect during the pandemic, because we not too many people were going out and meeting each other and whatnot. Um, so that's kind of what I've been playing recently. And also, and this just happens to be Gameloft. I'm not trying to promote Gameloft, but it is. But I
Sure,
have
sure.
been I've been playing Oregon Trail, and this is a game from
Oh,
Gameloft Brisbane, but it's like kind of a recreation of the old Oregon Trail game, right?
yeah.
And the way they do it, I was just really interested because I was a huge fan of Oregon Trail when I was younger, but they kind of recreated it to be just a bit more sort of appropriate. They've included, a lot more narrative from people of the time, right? So indigenous people, as well as people who are African American and things like that. They've given a lot of people a bit more storylines, and they've kind of had it in a way where there's like tidbits of like information on like the history of like what was happening during the time and things like that, and how difficult it was for some people and how easy it was for others. And there's just a bunch of improvements that I think they made, and the soundtrack's pretty good too. It's won a bunch of awards as well. But yeah, I've been playing that just because it's kind of like a cool sort of recall of a game that I used to play when I was younger too. But yeah,
Very
it
nostalgic.
actually, yeah, very nostalgic, and it actually has a bunch of story modes. So it's like once I started, I couldn't stop.
I had no idea that was Gameloft, so that's very cool to me. That's awesome.
Yes, something you can
Um,
download after this.
count on it, all of you as well. Is there anything that you want to say? Is there anything that was left unsaid on behalf of Gameloft or on behalf of yourself?
I think we covered a fair amount of it. I mean, I want to thank you, Scott, for being such a lovely host, and thank you, Natalie, for being the producer for this. Hopefully, I sounded okay and I looked okay. um, but yeah, no, thank you so much for having me on the podcast. And I guess like just as a side note, again, we are growing at Game of Toronto, and I would love to see more people, applying for all of their open job positions. We have some up already. I think they focus a bit more on artists and programmers, but we're definitely going to have more as the year goes on. So, please look out for us as one of the major growing players of Ontario as well.
Look out for them on their website. Look out for them on all app stores as well on the Lodge. We do make a point of making sure that we post a lot of those jobs on our job board. And some of their games are also featured in our Games from Ontario library as well. So thank you everyone for joining us today. Renee, thank you again for taking the time to talk to us and share all of your amazing insight and knowledge of the video game industry.
Thank
And a
you.
big thank you to Natalie on the ones and twos in the booth, and to Ontario Creates as well for their continued support of this program. We will see all of you very soon for when Nordicity Recaps kicks off, talking about Pocket Gamer Toronto. And we will be back with regular content from the Lodge from now on. Don't you worry. So until then, take care.